Hello, I'm Nick Haynes, and we are headed into the zone. We're lifting the hood on opportunity zones. Are they America's biggest new tool to save our country's most distressed neighborhoods? Or just a big tax break for the wealthy? Confused, befuddled, never even heard of them? Well, we've got your back. Before we show you what these zones look like around Kansas City, here are the 10 things you need to know about opportunity zones. Opportunity zones were tucked into the tax cuts signed by President Trump back in 2017. The goal? To encourage private investment in low-income communities and create jobs. So where are they? Well, you may not realize there are more than 8,000 opportunity zones around the country. 74 of them are in Kansas, 161 are in Missouri. So how were they chosen? Well, that decision was made by your state governor from census data on places most in need of help. So what's in it for investors? They can avoid paying taxes for one thing and do a bit of community good at the same time. In fact, if investors leave their money in opportunity zones for 10 years, they pay zero capital gains tax. So what might these investments look like? Well, it could be housing, shops, manufacturing facilities, but there are some restrictions. That means no so-called sin businesses like casinos or liquor stores. Investors looking to take advantage of these zones don't have to live or have a business in one of these zones. You can invest from anywhere, which has raised concerns that outside investors will be insensitive to the needs of these communities and risk displacing residents. Several community organizations are now trying to address that here. They're connecting would-be investors with local entrepreneurs and community leaders to make sure they benefit the neighborhoods they're intended to serve. But there are very few rules when it comes to these opportunity zones, and investors are not required to work with community partners. If you want to know where these opportunity zones are in your area, you may be surprised. Yes, areas east of Troost are included, but so are developing areas like Martin City. There are even 3 in suburban Johnson County, including downtown Shawnee. While opportunity zones are designed to help areas that have never seen much investment in generations, thanks to the way opportunity zones legislation was written, they're popping up in some surprising places. Can you guess where some of Kansas City's biggest opportunity zone activity is happening? How about downtown Shawnee in Johnson County? We take you inside.
The eastern portion of Shawnee, when you compare it to the broad sense of all of Johnson County, I do think we were left in the dust. It's a hidden little gem that needs reinvestment.
The opportunity zone for Shawnee has been very well-timed in the sense that the city has put in about $40 million of infrastructure funds into the downtown area, which is really sort of the heart of our opportunity zone. This was actually just those 1 in a million times that the stars somehow aligned and that the city had been planning for the downtown revitalization and the Neiman Road corridor. This sort of suburban hybrid model that we're creating here of walkable community, but not super dense like a downtown Kansas City or downtown larger city, may, ultimately be that perfect blend for people that kind of want to have the best of both worlds.
Realtor.com had said that Shawnee was the 4th hottest zip code in the United States. When you look at how they collected that data, they looked at different hot zones in the United States of where great things were happening, and then they just reached out just beyond that border and said, the houses are still affordable in Shawnee, and so I think our census data did prove that yes, we are a huge opportunity, and we're just on the cusp of jumping to that next level. We still didn't know a lot about opportunity zones. We were hearing a little bit of buzz, and I think the city was surprised that area was designated.
So each governor had a set amount of zones that they could end up selecting, and every governor did it slightly differently. Almost all of them took input from mayors and city councils, and then those mayors and city councils and those governors all went with different philosophies. And some governors and some localities in their recommendations really wanted to target on the most distressed tracts, the sort of poorest of the poor, use this program to sort of provide a maximum benefit and a shot in the arm. Others sort of targeted instead tracts that still qualified under the law, and that with that incremental tax benefit, they wanted to target some of the areas that were ready for development, and this incentive may be able to push it over the edge.
Really interesting part of the opportunity zones and the downside is that it can be used for all these different purposes, and we're not going to see a more cohesive, kind of approach nationwide to how it's used. Dovetailing program into program, there's not going to be a regional solution. There is a community by community solution to this.
Shawnee's position being 20 minutes from the plaza or 20 minutes from downtown. If you go to most metro areas, undoubtedly the highest value in the area often comes, within the Beltway, inside the 435 loop in our case, which, Shawnee is half in, half out. 6016 is a 67-unit apartment complex, luxury apartment complex in downtown Shawnee, Kansas. The project never would have occurred without being an opportunity zone because the cost structure of infill development in this particular case was so strong, so high. The fact that the city was putting millions of dollars into improvements on Neiman Road. The Shawnee Opportunity Zone, for lack of a better word, was one of the better opportunity zones that wasn't quite so appreciated in value from everything else around it. If you look at a scale of 1 to 100, and if you're at 101, you didn't qualify, the demographics were better. The reality is that the Shawnee Opportunity Zone is probably a 99.
What the Opportunity Zone has attracted to Shawnee has been multifamily development. We've got a mixed-use development in conversations right now that will be using some Opportunity Zone funds. That's kind of where we've seen that be a powerful tool for the downtown area. We've had a couple of breweries that have invested in the downtown area. Neither one of those took advantage of Opportunity Zone funding. The Aztec Theater, Historic Theater on Johnson Drive, Old Shawnee Pizza, and those smaller locally owned breweries, restaurants, boutiques are not able to take advantage of those funds, but they all, are part of the important overall picture of what we're trying to create. That old adage of when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. When we're not saying, 20 years from now, gosh, I wish we would have started to make investments. Truly now is such a great time for us to be investing in Shawnee.
From downtown Shawnee, we head north to Wyandotte County, where there are 6 opportunity zones. Many of them are in older, low-income neighborhoods, but they're also in formerly thriving industrial areas in Kansas City, Kansas, that have now fallen on hard times.
In Wyandotte County, we had 49 different census tracts that were actually eligible. The Turner Diagonal area, as well as around Indian Springs, that area, both of those have opportunity zones, and they've got the accessibility, they're on highways with industrial as well as office, that you can not only use opportunity zones for the actual building of the facility, but also for investing in the actual business. You have thousands of jobs and good paying jobs with benefits that are really beneficial to the folks that already live in our county.
We entertained a lot of different projects, but it was very important to look at one in which we could drive development, drive revenue into the community, find a way to utilize the transit lines that run along State Avenue, utilize the highway infrastructure. There's a lot happening at that location.
So we currently have a project that has received commission approval and is moving forward on the old Indian Springs Mall site. So this is a local company called Scavuzzo's. They do food distribution, and they'll be utilizing opportunity zones.
Really excited to share our vision for KC Foodie Park, the old Indian Springs site. I think that this is a project that has all the things to start revitalizing from that end of state.
Future phases will be retail along State Avenue, as well as a office project for their new headquarters, which they'll also be using opportunity zones for.
The idea that you've got a 100-year-old plus company looking to invest significantly into a national headquarters to create a net zero emissions facility and development, to tie in net new job creation that would incorporate hiring folks from Wyandotte County into that, paying good wages, good benefits, using the mass transit facility, talking to us about child care barriers and the needs that we have for child care in that area. the need to bring in additional eating establishments into that location and leveraging their relationships in the food industry to do that. All of those things are pretty compelling. Most of us who are close to the project believe is a great way to meld the industrial complex that we have to the south, the retail sector that we kind of have along State Avenue, and utilizing the highway infrastructure that we have there with Interstates 635 and I-70. The very fact that we have a logistics company in the food distribution system now looking at Indian Springs, it's an evolution of the site. It's an evolution of how we buy and handle retail across the country. Opportunity zones in particular rolled out with a lot of great fanfare, but without a lot of detail about how they would be utilized, what the rules were around them.
We've had 3 different large drops of regulations through this process, but we had no guidance on the actual interpretation of the act until it was October of 2018 was our first package that we got.
Date has started, clock is ticking, so new projects that start now are already going to be less than the 10-year window. It's expensive to go through and create an opportunity zone fund. It creates an additional layer of reporting that we don't typically see. I think there's still some question about what are all of the criteria long term. It's thrown into the middle of this is a pandemic, and that certainly will cause some challenges to getting everything pulled together. Right, that site's been sitting there for a very long period of time with little to no activity. We're talking about a few months. And in the course of the overall development, it's a very small amount of time. The last thing we want is to move forward with a project and then it not be successful. It's better to take our time, make sure it's right, make sure everybody is on the same page, and advance it forward so that it is a long-term, financially successful project. What the pandemic has illustrated is an even greater need for more food logistics and how we shop and how we get things delivered. But when you look at the logistics model that Scavuzzo's uses, to me, there's an even bigger demand for what they provide, which is regional distribution of food and food products. Now, assuming that there is another pandemic or an outbreak of the current one, we need to do a better job of having our supply chains in order within every metropolitan area around food in particular.
If you talk to anyone involved in opportunity zones, they will tell you that the rules are complicated. In fact, the IRS document spelling out all the regulations comes to a whopping 544 pages. Would you like to read through it with me? Oh, and by the way, some of the rules keep changing. You can see why only the most affluent of Americans have the resources to take advantage of this mammoth tax program. So how can Kansas City make sure those parts of our metro that need this cash injection the most are actually the ones who get that investment? That's where we're heading next, as In the Zone continues.
When Opportunity Zone program was launched, there was a coalition of civic leaders that came together from entrepreneurial to real estate and civic organizations, Hoffman Foundation, AltCap. We needed to work together to try and get Kansas City on the radar nationally. And they formed a group called We Grow KC.
And what we're working on is a pilot program, basically a one-stop shop, taking all the projects and information from the residents, providing that to an investor and say, here's what they want on this corner. Can you help us with financing? The summit that we had last June was amazing to bring people that likely would not have gotten to the table at all. It was great to see national investors. It was great to see local businesses and entrepreneurs able to pitch their ideas to investors.
That's important because if I'm an investor, I want to know, one, who's investing with me? Who has a track record that my money is not going to get lost? What's their connection to the neighborhoods, especially given that Kansas City's opportunity zones, for the most part, are urban core driven?
The summit helped last summer in two ways. One, it brought an awareness about what the opportunity zones were trying to do across the nation and what we were trying to do in Kansas City to get some benefit out of that tool.
My organization has been around since 1991. We are the master developers of what amounts to about $230, $240 million worth of development over the last 25 years. From the single family housing production to the 80,000 square foot Class A office building. I think that'd be, something that an Opportunity Zone fund might want to take a look at. Nothing. It's just interesting that we have not been able to capitalize on Opportunity Zone funding.
As a whole and as a region, I think we're definitely lagging behind other high growth areas across the country in investor adoption of this program and putting then real capital into real deals that are showing tangible results for the area.
I'm actually very skeptical of opportunity zones as a tool. There will be a set number of zones where it's easy to make money, and where it's easy to make money, that's where money flows. They're competing against 8,700 other spots. It's an investor-friendly program. That's challenging. You have to make a determination as a community. What is it that you really want to see?
In an uncertain environment where you don't have all of the regulation figured out and all of it put together, of course the market is going to select the sort of quote-unquote easiest tracks to develop in first, right? Those areas that, have the highest growth potential and the highest economic advantage. Martin City, Shawnee, the Turner Diagonal.
In the more challenging zip codes, whether that's rural or urban that's more concentrated like we have in Kansas City, different approaches have to happen. And where my skepticism does come in is absent those more cohesive collaborations with a state, with a community, with a city, with a county, it's going to be really difficult to pull together a kind of economic development plan that would be attractive to investors.
Truce Avenue is now the hot area, which is fantastic. But again, let's look at what that took. That took a significant investment by the city of Kansas City, Missouri to do all the infrastructure. It's now been primed to have an investment. But what we're talking about is outside of that 2 or 3 block radius on either side of Truce. What we're talking about is there still is a tremendous lack of investment. Rather it's infrastructure investment, rather it's banks coming to the table. There is still a perception of where I call my base of operation, that there can't be a return on investment. And that is correct. We can't give a 17 or 18% return on investment, a cash on cash return. But, we can give a 6 or 7% return on investment. The idea when this was started was it's a place for folks to put their capital gains, and if they leave it in for 10 years, then they get to keep all of those capital gains. Now that has been put also with the other requirements of, well, I want a return. In many cases, a return that's better than the stock market has done over the last, 24 months. The numbers just don't work. But it's going to take opportunity zones, banks, developers, and a crazy thing called developers using some of their own capital, which is something that we do, to make this stuff happen. Clearly, it has not been the shining star that we all thought the Opportunity Zone would be.
As a process here in Kansas City, I'm very encouraged because it's brought people to the table to think creatively about how do we pull all of the pieces together differently so that we can get something done.
We've been focusing on those social impact investors that want to make a difference and not want to get a huge gain out of the Opportunity Zone.
And they're not going to be hot capital. They're not going to look for a quick buck and be able to flip and move out of the deal in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. What you're doing is setting up a good basis to go into these neighborhoods and stay in these neighborhoods for a long period of time. These neighborhoods were distressed for a reason. They really need more capital put into them, not less, and it needs to be there for a long period of time to make the change.
We're trying to focus on how do you build the wealth of the resident that's living there, and how do you put all the tools together to make that happen. Opportunity Zones is just one of those tools.
One of the most promising things about opportunity zones is that we're talking about impact with our investments. So conversations that otherwise wouldn't be happening with the investment community are happening. And that has a much bigger picture impact for our community.
While the verdict is still out on how much opportunity zones will encourage private investment in Kansas City's most distressed zip codes, are we learning any lessons? Are we answering any questions about how to best uplift our most struggling communities? And as In the Zone continues, where do we go from here?
What we've been doing over and over again is focusing on that one thing or that one company that can come in and save us all. That is just not going to happen. It hasn't happened in the history of the United States. It's not going to happen in Kansas City. And if we're going to be competitive as a region, we need to get real about growing our people here and investing in our people. We do that, others are going to want to come. That's actually the history of economic development.
It's interesting having a conversation about opportunity zones in the current climate because they do feel like they were this big shiny new toy that we all had a year ago. And now, you know, in many ways our world hasn't changed so significantly. We're just looking at it differently. And in some ways it has changed so much.
Much of the urban core, and particularly neighborhoods that we work in, we already had pandemic-like symptoms going on already. We were already at 17, 18%. In some areas, some zip codes as high as 22%. People were dying, yes, in the urban core before the pandemic. Banks are already slowing down on, reviewing projects that were already in the pipeline. That's definitely not good for redevelopment in areas of the urban core.
The coronavirus pandemic is really making all of us urgently aware of how much more we need to invest in our Main Street and our frontline workforce. The small mom and pops, the things that make our communities very authentic, that give them that sense of character and uniqueness. We have to think about ways to use economic development tools to help them maintain their presence in our community, because without that, we lose a lot of the character of our city and of our neighborhoods. Those pioneers and those champions that are there locally help provide stability. They recognize the beauty and the authenticity and the quality of that place. That's our future. Those are going to be the companies that are going to grow and that are going to create jobs as we emerge out of what is looking like a recession at this point.
COVID is creating more need for opportunity zone capital than ever before, but there's probably less opportunity zone capital to go around because of it. Based on that you have to have capital gains, and I think there's less capital gains in the country right now, and that you've got this long-term lockup of the capital, that folks are really hungering for liquidity at this moment. Rather than being locked up in deals for a long period of time, what we will need and require is the overall economy, the overall markets to heal before opportunity zones comes back as strong as it was in 2019, or really stronger now that we have all the regulations. America's going to need all of that and more to get going again.
I think it was an opportunity missed, because now we're in year 3 of a 10-year scenario. Hey, we're moving on. I can't stop transforming the landscape of Kansas City because I can't get opportunity zone funding. I've got to find a way to keep going on, and that's what we've done.
Opportunity zones, again, are a tool, right? They're another arrow in our quiver. So they're here whether or not we use them as a community. So let's put them in our pocket. Let's use them when we can, but they're not going to save the world. There are a lot of ways that we can invest in our community. And so ultimately, if we're looking at all the different forms of capital, whether it's philanthropy, private investment, public financing, and pulling all of those together in creative ways and having conversations at a community level about what we want our communities to look like, then that's what really matters. And so we're going to continue doing that, whether or not opportunity zones gain traction or not.
How do you use a tool like this to get more private investment into an area that it hasn't before? What they're realizing is it's not the tool, it's the question. How do you get private investment into an area that it hasn't before? And that's what every community needs to focus on. How do we have a conversation that looks at systematic issues that have been entrenched for 50 years around race, highway systems, all of the things that have led us to where we're at today? That means not just focusing in on one element, affordable housing and building housing. That means not just focusing on job development and focusing on workforce development. That doesn't mean just focusing on early education or high school. It means trying to get a more cohesive approach for all of those things. That's what I think this has to do with our community. Less about a tax break for people that have a capital gains event happen. And that's why as a foundation and as a coalition, we've moved beyond opportunity zones and thinking of that as more a tool in the toolbox versus the end result. The end result that we're shooting for is how do you build wealth within a community? And doing that means you use all the tools that you have available, including the Opportunity Zone tax credit, but focusing also on all of the other programming and pulling that into a more strategic approach.
We're not sure if Opportunity Zones is going to be here in the next 3, 5, let alone 10 years. We're beyond trying to figure out what an Opportunity Zone can really do or mean. The most important thing is a change in our community and making Kansas City a better Kansas City.
The Opportunity Zone program isn't the first redevelopment tool to make promises of transformational change to impoverished areas, and it certainly won't be the last. Hopefully, though, Kansas City is learning some lessons from this experience. 10 years from now, will we really look back at these Opportunity Zones as the catalyst that led to some serious economic improvement? I tell you what, if I promised to be here 10 years from now, would you join me to judge how we did? That's it for our program. But if you want to learn more about Opportunity Zones and see more reporting about zones where you live, visit us at flatlandkc.org/opportunityzones. Until next time, I'm Nick Haynes. Good night.